When it came to punk rock, there was a bit of a kind of delayed reaction simply because geographically we were 450 miles away from London. So there was this kind of punk rock explosion happening, in the middle of Soho. And then it kind of, moved up the country and got to Glasgow a few months later.
Pre-punk, I don't think Glasgow had a music scene, not one that I was aware of. And there just weren't that many venues. And there weren't that many bands. I guess if there were Glasgow bands, they left, they went to London.
The place where St Enoch's Centre is now, there used to be a train station, the Glasgow Old Underground, and there was a little punk club in there. But the guy, the DJ, basically, he had a cassette, a couple of singles and a couple of albums, so we just listened to the same punk stuff all night long, but we didn't care because it was the only place we could go.
One of the earliest so-called punk gigs was a gig at the City Halls in Glasgow. The Stranglers headlined it, which I attended. And at the end of the gig, fans invaded the stage and the gig got abandoned.
There was a big riot. I guess lots of kids having fun was like a riot, and it got banned.
Glasgow City Council banned punk, which just seemed fairly crazy. So as a consequence, a lot of bands for a period of time were having to play in places like Paisley.
There was a guy in Paisley, a butcher, called Harry Stewart, and he must have been quite an enterprising businessman because he thought, there's kind of money to be made in this whole punk rock lark. So he started, and you'll think I'm making this up, Disco Harry's punk rock nights every Monday at the Silver Thread Hotel in Paisley.
In the punk days, that was Paisley was the centre of punk rock. Silver Threads Hotel, used to go there practically every week and saw all the greats of punk rock.
Paisley was kind of the centre of all that music because we had the Bungalow Bar, which was like when we were kids, we'd go from school and we'd lie about our ages to get into the Bungalow Bar to go and see these bands, and we used to go and see bands 5 nights a week. People talk about it and you say, well, we saw Echo and the Bunnymen, Teardrop Explodes, Wahheat, or whatever they're called then, all in the 1 week.
We saw loads of people there, like the Rosillos, Billy Idol. Everybody went to Paisley because they couldn't go to Glasgow, and that was just an amazing time. It was every Tuesday night at the Silver Thread. The
attitude with the council softened a wee bit, and punk rock seemed to be suddenly accepted, within the city boundaries. So it was easy enough to sort of go and see a gig, whether it was at Saints and Sinners, which is the forerunner to King Tut's, or a place called the Dial Inn, which was a kind of pub venue opposite where the old Odeon Cinema used to be, or of course most famously the Mars Bar down in Howard Street.
People actually gathered about record shops starting from maybe I'd say it's January 1977 when people started kind of hanging about record shops, and I'd hang about things Bruce's record shops, and that's how you got to actually form bands.
It was really exciting because there was these great record shops, Listen, Graffiti, places like that where you would go and congregate because there was no place else to go.
Stephen Daly worked in Listen. Big John from the Exploited, he worked in Listen. Brian Taylor from the Pastels, he worked in Wee Blogs. Quite a few of the guys actually in bands. Mickey Rooney from Primevals, he worked in Blogs as well. Callum Cupperson, he was in the Subs. So all these guys were actually working in record stores.
It was a common place for basically dropouts and musicians, and the whole staff were basically either aspiring or failed musicians or uni dropouts. It was just where everybody ended up.
Suddenly the city centre in both Glasgow and Edinburgh particularly were a kind of hotbed of activity. You could come and you could go into a record store, or you could go to a gig, or you could go to a cafe, or you could go to a clothes shop and meet like-minded people.
I kind of went to college imagining that I'd meet fantastic, amazing people and my life would change, and which never really happened. Everyone was kind of dull and uninteresting, so I kind of dropped out, and then I thought, dropping out isn't the answer, so I kind of got back in second year, and Edmund started first year. And I just saw this guy carrying an amplifier on one hand and a guitar on the other, and I just went up and introduced myself. I thought, this is the kind of person I thought, you know, I might meet at college. And he pretty much said, after a couple of hours, do you want to be in my band? So I thought, hey, this is the kind of offer that I was thinking, you know, this is going to be a life-changing event, and it was. The new Sonics were just ending, and they had done a kind of rough demo for the new group, which was going to be Orange Juice, and Edwin gave me this demo, and I thought it was fantastic. It kind of, I mean, they thought they were making pop music, but to me it sounded like Perubu or something. It was like it was really discordant, and you know, Edwin's voice was Edwin's voice.
They weren't brilliantly received, you know. I remember them playing the art school, and there was a lot of kind of jeering and you know, stuff being beer being thrown and stuff like that, because you know, punk was kind of, although it was different, it was basically, it was rock based, and Orange Juice were not rock based, they were pop based, they were jangly, they were, you know, they looked completely different, they were, you know, people didn't understand it.
Their influences were very kind of different to the whole punk rock influences of somebody like, say, Simple Minds, where it was all, you know, Can and Kraftwerk and early Genesis and that kind of stuff. They were kind of very much, you know, it's an old cliche to say it, you know, the floppy fringe and the kind of lumberjack shirt and the kind of jangly guitars.
Orange Juice always had a kind of postmodern aesthetic in that they were going to like pick apart music that had already been made. You know, it's a question of that kind of magpie technique of forming a band.
Groups like the Birds, 60s groups, and even the Beatles. But what he created, or what this kind of songs he wrote, was so unlike anything that he listened to, I always felt.
We'll take, you know, the Creedence Clearwater guitar sound and try and merge it with a chic rhythm section, and which kind of worked quite well because nobody was really musically competent enough to do it in any way that was identifiable.
Edwin and I were kind of saying, maybe we should go to Zoo Records, or maybe we should try and find another independent rather than, you know, we'd been sending tapes to majors, nobody was interested, maybe zero interest. And Alan was the one who said, we could do this, you know, I could set up a record label. Alan and Edwin and I put in whatever money we had. I had some savings, Edwin had some savings, and Alan got some money from his parents. So we just put all the money in, and then really from then on it was Edwin and Alan who were the driving force of the group and the label.
It was Alan Horne and Edwin Collins who kind of came up with the little drumming cat and the men in kilts and all the rest of it. There was a certain amount of input from the bands, but I think it was really driven by Alan and Edwin. And Edwin, apart from anything else, a really great graphic designer, great visual sense. So they had a great art director behind it.
Edwin was the centre of everything. I mean, without Edwin Collins, there wouldn't have been Postcard, there wouldn't have been, you know, Orange Juice. He was kind of like the driving force behind it all.
But Horne himself was very much, he was kind of like the Andy Warhol sort of figure or whatever. But he had great ideas and he's very well informed, as was Edwin and James Kirk and all Stephen Daly and all these guys. You know, they were fantastic.
Alan Horne was very, I guess, cheeky, egocentric, naughty, inspired, fueled by, as I think he probably said himself, negative punk energy. You know, you define yourself partly again by what you don't want to be and what you hate. So you'd make a point of rubbing people up the wrong way.
You didn't want to really disagree with Alan a lot of the time. Quite strong character, strong personality.
Alan particularly was just so cutting and camp and cynical that you know, I hadn't really ever known anything like that.
I remember Alan Horne saying that I had teddy boy shoes on, you know, like brothel creepers, and they weren't cool for them. They were more into sandals, sandals, and he says, "Are they Johnny Rotten shoes you've got on?"
When he was sort of round us, like girls at school who sort of fancied you, but they really didn't want you to know that and their way of kind of communicating to you would just be to insult you constantly and sort of take the piss out of you.
We used to meet up often in Equies and Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow, it's a little kind of Italian cafe, and we'd sit there without tuppence to rub together, watching Alan tuck into, like, you know, a big ice cream.
I don't know, I don't really know what to say about Alan. that isn't too controversial.
If I could do something to help Alan, could I, put a few hundred singles into the shops in Edinburgh, or could I contact that agent, or I could do something for Orange Juice as well as Joseph Kay, then I think he was a nice chap. Other times you'd quite happily circumvent you and be quite manipulative. But once you know that's the way Alan worked, that was it. That's just the way he was, I think.
In some ways, Alan was a little bit like a fifth member of Orange Juice. He kind of was around. He was around all the time. If Alan had said, "David's terrible, don't get him in the group," Edwin possibly would have said, "Okay, we won't."
He famously thought that the managers in punk rock were as important as the singers. Malcolm McLaren would be interviewed as well as the Sex Pistols. People like Kay Carroll, the manager of The Fall, Bernie Rhodes with The Clash and Subway Sect. These were like figures who were creative, almost like artists in themselves. And I think that's what he modelled himself as.
It's that kind of attitude. It was not musicians that do all the great things. It's the people behind the scenes who manipulate musicians like him.
When you think about how young he was when we were all doing this, we were all in our sort of early, either sort of basically 20, 21, 22, that kind of age. Really young to be doing. He had quite a kind of mature, cynical head on his shoulders.
Very intelligent, fierce energy. Somebody to make things happen.
Edwin and I both had jobs. We worked at the Glasgow Parks Department as illustrators, so it was kind of, for a while we were working 9 to 5 jobs and then rehearsing in the evenings. We rehearsed at my flat a lot, which was 185, which was my original 185 that became the Home's Postcard, was sort of originally my flat.
Eventually, Alan and I ended up in what became the Postcard Records place, 185 West Princess Street. We lived there for years. It was
an interesting flat. It was a little bit like, I think Simon Goddard kind of talks about the Postcard as being like a fairy tale, his book, but it was more like, to me it was more like a Tennessee Williams play.
185, there was an awful lot of people in and out all the time. Alan and Krisha and I lived there, but there were always people hanging around. Edwin from Orange just seemed to be there most of the time, whether you wanted them or not.
I remember going to 185 West Princess Street fairly early on, and it was incredibly intimidating because, when you walked in, there they all were. Horne quite literally would play the same Chic record on his old-fashioned dance set, record player over and over and over again. He would just leave the arm off and this Chic record would play, and then the needle would go back to the start and it would play again.
Alan would play records, but he would play the same record all day. So you get dribbling magic all day, 24 hours of it on click, back to start.
The great thing about the Postcard flat was you would go in and it was like a little, a mini sort of like a cottage industry sort of thing. There'd be people sitting on the floor folding record sleeves or hand colouring record sleeves.
And the whole postcard thing was great because we used to go around and hang out in Alan and Edwin's flat and just have a laugh. And I remembered sort of making this sort of like the Orange Juice singles and drawing on them, and all the ones somebody sitting on the toilet, they were all me.
They were like a large piece of paper that was going to be folded over, and we had to do sort of individual colouring. So I think there was only about 5 of us in this room with felt pens and and 1,000 of these things. We're going, we'll get this done in no time. You're joking. We were, after about 10 each, we were so bored. So we ended up getting like a whole load of felt pens and just doing this across them.
One boring Friday, I was working away on the counter and this chap in pink glasses walked up to the counter with armloads of records, and that turned out to be Alan Horne from Postcard, who I'd never heard of. And he had one other guy with him kind of laughing in the background, who I think was Edwin. But I'd never even heard of the groups he brought up, and dropped the needle on the record, and there's like really trebly, twangy noise comes out the speakers, and it just wasn't a sound I was really used to. You know, it was like that was the trebly sound of young Scotland, you know, the twangy sound of Postcard records.
once Postcard got going, because Stephen left the group just before we released the first single, came back into the group later, and that was when he set up his own label.
First single that came out in 1979, our first single on a label called Absolute Records. It was the only ever release on Absolute Records, and that was through Stephen Daly, who was the drummer in Orange Juice.
I mean, Stephen just kind of was, I think, sick of the lack of professionalism within the group, the fact that we were, fey and wimpy. I think he wanted to be something that was a bit more, a bit tougher.
Stephen had a kind of love-hate relationship with Orange Juice at the time. Sometimes he would be in Orange Juice, sometimes he wouldn't be. And he would play with his Glasgow punk band called the Fun Four.
I was between bands at the time, and I'd actually gone had a normal job, and I was saving money, and I was going to put a record out. And I met Edwin crossing St Vincent Street, and we had a kind of conversation. It said, "Yeah, well, Stephen's interested." Stephen had actually left Orange Juice at that time, so he put me in touch with Stephen, and we came up with a plan to put out the Fun Four single.
When I began working with Joseph Kay, I think they had just put out their first single on Absolute, and Postcard hadn't yet signed them.
The first single was Chance Meeting and Romance, sort of double A side, which did okay. It got reviewed. I think at least it got reviewed. I think it got mixed reviews, which Joseph Kay always got mixed reviews. It wasn't like we were press darlings the way Orange Juice were.
We did the Absolute record. It just seemed like it all seemed to be quite a natural progression. I just remember hearing something, well, Alan and Edwin want to do a label and put us out on the label. So, we were doing quite a few shows with Orange Juice, and it sort of made sense that we were all sort of under the same roof. It wasn't too much to think about, really. We just went ahead and did it, not knowing what would happen at all,
Alan did realise that he wanted to have an actual record label and not just be... we didn't want Postcard Records just to be a vehicle for Orange Juice. So for all he had serious reservations about Joseph Kay, Alan Horne, asked us to be on Postcard Records.
There was a little point of friction because Alan Horne signed Joseph Kay, and of course they'd sort of been seen a little bit maybe as Stephen's band, a little bit having found them. He had predicted a grand plan. He was going to have Orange Juice were like his Lovin' Spoonful, and Joseph Kay were going to be his Velvet Underground. Of course, he was Andy Warhol sitting there right in the middle, looking through the tambourine. And he liked that idea, the symmetry of a West Coast and an East Coast band.
The first release would have been Falling and Laughing by Orange Juice. That was the first Postcard single. And then he put out Blue Boy and Radio Drill Time. Blue Boy by Orange Juice, Radio Drill Time by Joseph Kay at the same time.
Blue Boy was a great recording, that because it was a really easy song to play, and it sounded fantastic. In fact, that was probably one of the singles that I think that the production I quite like. I think it captures on record the way we would play that song live.
Around that time, I think the press had got onto things, and there was Dave McCulloch had come up for Sounds, and the whole thing started with that big article on Sounds, and that seemed to change. I felt a big change after that. It seemed like it was the start of a scene or something. There was something up in Scotland to go and check out.
When Joseph Kay and Orange Juice released their two singles at the same time, there did seem to be a genuine upsurge of interest in Postcard. And it was an era in which, particularly things like the News Express or the NME, if they paid attention to you, then it really made a difference.
There was just outrageous things said, like, is this man too cool to live, sort of thing. What can you say to that? Is this man God? You can't take that seriously.
The music press get really excited, and rightly so, about Scotland and Glasgow in particular, because, punk had started in the centre of London, and then the kind of wave had gone up through Manchester into Liverpool, and then suddenly it reached Glasgow. And then, you were getting guys like, Charles Shar Murray from the NME, or Paul Molly from the NME, or, Danny Baker, jumping in a flight, because, the British Airways shuttle was the other thing. Suddenly Glasgow was only an hour away.
For the London-based music press, it was like a beacon of sunshine and light out of this darkness that Joy Division and other groups, post-punk groups at that time, kind of represented.
You know, Orange Juice were a dream for that kind of thing, you know, particularly for the NME, because, you know, Edwin was so quick-witted and so sharp. Stephen Daly and, you know, Edwin Collins were almost like the Eric and Ernie of rock. It was like a comedy double act because, you know, Stephen Daly would kind of, you know, load the cannonballs and Edwin would fire them. But they were so quick-witted. I mean, you know, every time, you know, you went to interview them, although they were very intimidating, it was always hilarious because you would ask them a question and you would get such a great, sharp, witty, funny answer.
You had all this big London magazines and newspapers writing about, as Horne famously said, you know, the Postcard was basically a wardrobe in his flat in Princes Street. But there was that nice feeling of, you know, a cheeky chappy up and at him and maybe upsetting the balance of things in a very positive way.
It no longer was it the case that bands had to move to London to make it. There were like sort of other poles, you know. There were other centres of energy.
Scotland was just one possible provincial backwater that the London-based music press could look at, and I think it was very much oriented to how the London press would gobble up Scotland periodically. You know, Scotland would be trendy for a year or 2 years or whatever. You'd write about Scottish bands, and then they would be neglected again for 5 years or whatever. So it was a way to say, okay, come and get us, boys. You know, we are here. We're Scottish. We're cute. We're young. We're fresh, freshly squeezed, and all the rest of it. But it was a little bit making fun of that self-commodification.
Alan Horne knows how to deploy camp and take the Scottish kilt on your artwork and make it camp and different and make fun of it and take Scottishness and stand in its head, and that takes a certain amount of wit and cleverness. And I think Alan had that.
The whole Postcard Records thing was great, not only for Orange Juice and Aztec Carmen, the Go-Betweens, and also Joseph Kay, but it was also great for Alan Horne because suddenly you had this kind of pop Svengali, or as near to a pop Svengali as Scotland was ever going to get. He was like a cross between, you know, Phil Spector in one corner and, you know, Colonel Tom Parker in the other corner and Brian Epstein in the other corner of the room and, you know, some real Malcolm McLaren manipulator.
That was Alan called it the sound of young Scotland. Alan used to write that and things. That was nothing, it wasn't the sound of young Scotland. I mean, you know where that comes from. Like Motown Records used to have a slogan, the sound of young America. When Postcard Records were going, you know, most young people in Scotland would just thought we were weirdos probably. You know, they were into Grease and Saturday Night Fever.
Up until that point, Scottish rock stars had been people like Frankie Miller and, you know, Alex Harvey or Dan McCafferty of Nazareth, you know, guys who, you know, if you'd met them in a lane at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, looked as if they could have held their own, whereas, you know, Orange Juice were very intimidating, but not in a physical way. It was just like they just had such contempt for everything that they didn't like.
Well, I think we never doubted from the very beginning that we were onto something. I mean, I always think that we thought we were really fantastic, and so yeah, it wasn't really a surprise that people finally started realising that how good we were.
James Kirk and I were on the bus going out to my flat in Darnley in Glasgow, and he was talking about this fanzine that he was doing, and I was given he couldn't be bothered doing it anymore. It was called Strawberry Switchblade, and I was going, "You've got to do it. That's a fantastic name. You have got to do it." And he was going, "I'm just going to give it up." And you can't waste that name. And he said, "Have it." And I went, "What? Really? Really?" And I was like so excited, and I just thought, so basically the band came from the name. Because I was in a band already, but I just thought, I'm going to start a female band.
Rose was one of the first punks in Glasgow, and she knew Peter, and I met through him, and she was like one of the characters, a real character on the scene.
When Peter started going out with Jill, I got to know her a wee bit. And they just came out to our house in Darnley once, and Jill and I were sitting in the bedroom going through jewellery, ribbons, things, you know, and I told her about the band, and it was like, oh, she wanted to do that as well. And it was like, yeah, right, what do you want to play? What do you want to play, sort of thing. And basically that's how Jill came into it. And then she knew a drummer, a female drummer, and I knew a female bass player.
When we decided we were going to be in a band, let's be in a band. Rose was playing drums in our husband's band, and she wanted to sing. So we were like, oh, let's get a band together. And so, you know, I bought a guitar, really cheap guitar, out of a second-hand shop, and thought we'd better learn to play some chords and write some songs. And I think we booked the Spaghetti Factory gig. We didn't have any songs, so we had to write them really quickly and rehearse them, which we did. I think we had 6 songs, and Since Yesterday was the second one.
First time I met Roddy was at the local youth centre, the Key Youth Centre. And she said, "You should film that place." It was the epicentre of the scene in Switchblade. And so I was there. Switchblade is like top punk musician for all it's worth. And I remember showing Roddy introduced this little David Bowie lookalike, little guy with plastic sandals on, spiky hair. And I had the guitar and I was playing the guitar. I said, this is White Right by the Clash, you know, can you do this? I'm showing him how to play it, sort of thing. He's like, yeah. Gave the guitar to him, and as soon as he played, my jaw hit the deck, you know. I was like, geez, this lad's going to be a star.
My memory of Roddy Frames as a 16-year-old are slightly vague, but charming, quiet, looking a bit cowboyish with a red neckerchief, but supremely talented.
Roddy, musical mercenary that he is, was looking to surround himself with the best musicians possible. Alan was a lovely guy, he looked the part and everything, but he wasn't really a player. David Mulholland, the drummer, was great. He's a brilliant drummer. And then I was fairly handy at the bass, so that's when Roddy saw his chance, move over Welshie in Newcombe. And so that lineup was myself, David Mulholland and Roddy. Somehow or other, Malcolm Ross got a hold of the demo, probably through Alan Campbell, and he obviously heard, this is good, and he spoke to Alan. And Alan came along to see us. We were playing the Bungalow Bar in Paisley, and in the audience was Malcolm, Alan Horne, and Edwin Collins. They'd all come along to see us, and straight away they recognised there was something really special going on here. And Alan spoke to us at the end of it. First time we met Malcolm and Edwin, and Alan became instant friends with Malcolm and Edwin. And then the next day, Alan invited us around to his flat, West Princess Street, went round there and said, you know, you'd like to make some records with us? Of course we would.
I was more friends with a band called Lot of Images at the start, because I went to school with sort of like friends of theirs. And then their managers suggested I start a band up, you know. And I was telling Edwin this, and Edwin was kind of saying, well, you have to write some songs then. You know, I had one song that Alan Horne had called She Hates Travel. So he said, you have to write some songs. So I used to go out to his house and he would try and show me how to, you know, write songs, you know. And then from that, I kind of got a little bit of a set together.
We formed the Bluebells after I was in a band at school called Rodeo with my brother David, who played the drums. And we were interviewed by Bobby Bluebell, who had a fanzine called 10 Commandments, which is a great fanzine actually. Very well informed, and it was looking at the kind of Glasgow scene. Then we became part of the Bluebells through that, and we got to know the Postcard guys up in West Princess Street through that, and we supported, you know, Orange Juice, Aztec Camera on tour.
Around about the same time, the Go-Betweens came to Glasgow and stayed in the West End.
Vague recollections of these two Australians turning up, and I think they stayed at 185 for a while. Slightly out of place in Glasgow, you got two kind of, you know, fairly lively Australians amongst a bunch of dour, angst-ridden little Glasgow kids.
They were kind of a breath of fresh air as well, because they were quite They were quite different, but they had the same, I don't know, the same attitude, the same appreciation for what each other were doing.
We did a single for the Cuba Libre, Back from the Dead. Steve was on drums, and we had Nick, who's in the Lone Wolves now, was on bass, and Laurie, he was on guitar. We did Back from the Dead, and Stephen gave a copy to Brian Taylor, who was Alan Horne's flatmate, and gave it to Alan. Next I got a phone call from Alan, asked me did I want to. I said, put the single out on Postcard at the moment, but I'd already actually made a promise to Cuba Libre I'd put out on their label, so I couldn't break that, so but that was an interesting thing. So I could have been in Postcard earlier than people thought.
It became the time to make an album. It would be the first album on Postcard. So I can't remember why we were doing it instead of Orange Juice, but for some reason we were making an album. I think that Alan wanted to do it. We went ahead and went to Castle Sound Studios. It was good to be in a real proper studio doing the first album. We had scope to do much more with instruments and production. And we all felt at the time it was going pretty well. The only time he really had a strong opinion about one of the songs was it was Chance Meeting. He really believed it could be developed into a better commercial song. So I think Alan feeling it had a good chance of maybe doing something because it was getting towards a pop classic, as he was kind of desperate to have was his pop classics.
There's a lot of argument about what happened to the first Joseph K album. I mean, I think the prosaic version, I think probably is that they weren't happy with the sound. And it seems quite an archaic idea now when recording is everything. But I think probably Joseph K, in many respects, regarded themselves as a live band, that you had to be in the room at a gig to get the guitars, the feeling, the kind of immensity of it all. And that wasn't something you necessarily got out of your little record player.
We decided when we recorded our album we wouldn't listen to it until it came out. So when we left the studio we said, right, we're not going to listen to it, we're just going to wait till it comes out. And then when Alan did get test pressings, unfortunately this coincided with Alan having a kind of loss of confidence about where the label was going and what was happening with the label.
Sometimes he liked Joseph K and sometimes he didn't. And I think he felt ambiguous towards them. Sometimes you'd kind of disparagingly kind of compare them to kind of Joy Division rip-offs, and then another day you'd think they were great. So I think he did feel ambiguous about it, and I think sometimes the band members kind of were a little bit wary about that.
So Alan started sowing the seeds of doubt about, he was saying, I don't think it sounds very good, the drums are mixed too loud and things like that. And we were like that, really? And we had written some songs in this period as well, and probably the sound of the group had changed a bit. So when we listened to it, we were kind of like, we were disappointed.
It seemed like something had happened at the cut or something off the record, because it sounded flatter to us. We'd heard a sort of shiny, sort of slightly trebly record that had an edge to it, and when we heard the masters, it sounded blanded out, and I don't know what happened there.
The last track, Sorry for Laughing, which was going to be the title track, when we'd mixed that, we'd put a lot of reverb on the snare drum, and that just emphasised that the song was slowing up and speeding down really quite badly. If you listen to that version of it, which I think is available on one of the CDs, it slows down and speeds up really badly. And I thought, oh God, we can't have that. And Alan started saying, well, it's okay, look, we're not happy with this, we don't have to put this out, I'll talk to Rough Trade, who manufactured and distributed the records, and we'll re-record the album, or we'll remix it or something. Of course, Rough Trade were aghast because they'd put up, quite a substantial budget for it. In relative terms, I think we'd been in the studio for 5 days or something, which So we didn't put it out, and we went back to the studio in Belgium and recorded the scratchy, difficult to listen to Only Fun in Town album.
Pure and simple, it just didn't seem to be the sound of Joseph Kay. And that's why we just weren't happy to put it out. And Alan seemed to just go along with that without any argument. It just seemed, oh well then. Which, it seemed a bit odd.
I think with Falling and Laughing, that was fantastic. It was, you can want for more, single of the week. But I was never really that bothered by the music press. I mean, Alan and Edwin and Stephen were really avid music press followers, where I hadn't really kind of grown up in that, with that. So it didn't really bother me that much when we started getting bad reviews. Edwin was amazing because he could remember every single comment that would be in a review. So if a reviewer said anything bad about an Orange Juice song or anything in an Orange Juice song, he'd never forget it. He would, if he met that journalist, he would bring it up. So he took it very, very personally.
I mean, Orange Juice always was saying, we want to have a hit single. We don't want to be alternative and independent. We want to be popular, all through Postcard. Which I don't know how people must have taken that if you listen to the records, and which obviously weren't going to get played on daytime Radio 1. But they were always trying to do that.
It was very trying, it was a trying period. It was because Alan he'd be one day he'd be like, we're going to change the world. It's it's going to be fantastic, and the next day he'd be lying on the floor in his bedroom in tears. It's like it's a disaster. Orange Juice are crap. You can't play. It'd be so. It was a roller coaster ride.
We recorded the demos for the first Orange Juice album before Alan had secured the deal with Polydor. We'd came in, and over 3 days we recorded what became Ostrich Churchyard album. We recorded some backing tracks first day, did some overdubs on the second day, and mixed it all on the third day. Just kind of realised it was something kind of quite special we just kind of captured.
Alan Horne always was like, this music, the music I'm putting out should be in the charts. It should be top 40. And he tried to do it with Postcard, and he got, Orange Juice almost got to the point of having a hit on an indie label. In the end, they had to, it was something of a ideological blow. They had to sign to Polydor, and eventually they did have hits through a major label.
I was through in Glasgow. Joseph Kay were playing our gig, which ended up being our last gig. So I'd stayed at Alan Horne's. I think I phoned Davy just to see what time they were going to be leaving with the gear in Edinburgh, and Davy said, Paul's saying this is the last gig he's going to do, and Joseph Kay's not doing any more gigs after this. And I was kind of a bit annoyed, and that he hadn't even spoken to me about it, and they'd just made this unilateral kind of decision. And I just kind of said to Davy, fuck him, well, that's the end of the band then, eh?
The other members of the band besides Paul might have been happy to carry on playing. Paul, for his own reasons, has never really liked playing live, ironically. And perhaps he felt he'd done everything he could with Joseph Kay.
There'd been a sort of agreement that it wouldn't carry on too long. It was the right time. When you do something like that, it's got to be as a tight unit. You've got to get that intensity on stage and everything, and to convey that. You've got to be really all in the same ballpark. And when you start to sort of drift apart and not socialise so much and go in different areas with whatever they are, then it's hard to get that back when you're on stage. You're kind of meeting up to do a job, in a sense, which was never my intention. I didn't want for it to become like a, let's go to work. I'd always thought it would just be like it was in the early days. We were really us against the world.
You had to create a moment, and Joseph Kay had to get an exciting moment, in the same way that they would talk about just doing one album and then that's it. The idea that when it became a job and it became predictable and you had to go to album 2 and album 3, that almost goes against the idea of creating a flash of excitement. And that is not a commercial idea, that's totally an artistic idea.
I think probably with Joseph K splitting up and Orange Juice moving to a major label, Alan Horne seemed to lose interest in the label, I think. He probably, he had Aztec Camera still at that point, and you could see they were destined to sort of start breaking big. But I don't think Alan was interested in, necessarily being successful just for the sake of it.
I don't know if Alan knew what to do with us. I think Postcard existed mainly to release Orange Juice records, and in the meantime Alan expanded it with the Go-Betweens and Joseph K and ourselves, only because he could.
I think sometimes he might have liked the odd show, but and he maybe understood there was a few decent tunes. He thought there was a few commercial possibilities, but as a whole, no, I don't think he did really like us. But I didn't care at all. So he had an opinion about everything, so that was one of his opinions.
I mean, as soon as Orange Juice had left Postcard, I mean, that was really it, as far as I was concerned, for that iteration of Postcard.
We released Just Like Gold, it delivered, and everyone thought, this is wonderful, the next big thing, blah, blah, blah. If it had gone at that point, we maybe have got whoever we wanted, but we held back, rather Roddy held back. And time had passed, so that things were cooling a wee bit. We did Maths of Wire, which time David Mulholland was no longer with us, and Stephen Daly played drums. Now Stephen Daly, great guy, I like Stephen a lot, but compared to David Mulholland, who was like a great drummer, really brilliant drummer, it wasn't there. The record was flat, and that didn't help things. So in the end up, the biggest label that would doing with us was Rough Trade.
In fairness, I think when Aztec Camera and Orange Juice got signed to major record labels, it was the best thing for them. They wanted better studios, they wanted better promotion. I know that's not very exciting or creative, but they need that, and you need to go on to the next stage. And I think they got it.
When we knew Jeff from Rough Trade, Jeff Travis, they were they distributed Postcard records, I believe, so there was that connection. And we went down to London in early 1982, spoke to Jeff, and Jeff was more than happy to have us.
I mean, looking back on it now, if had, from a careerist point of view, we should have listened to Alan Campbell, and because Alan Campbell, I remember, would tell us things like, Virgin Records phoned me, they'd be quite interested. And we'd be like, no way we would sign to Virgin, we're staying on Postcard Records, we're going to be independent.
I knew Joseph K just because they were being written about in the music press, and they were a local band, and they played a lot live, and I would see them when I was... Magazine were my heroes, Howard Devoto, so Joseph K were often supporting Magazine when they played in Scotland.
The Happy Family was just a vehicle for Nick's songs. He'd given me a tape of them when Joseph K was still going, and they were great songs, so I was quite happy to help him record them and try and kind of give him a leg up.
I got a letter from Davey Weddell, who'd been the bass player in Joseph K, saying 4AD are interested in doing a record with this band we'd put together called The Happy Family.
There was me and Davey and this guy Paul Mason, who had been like Joseph K's roadie, and that was the original Happy Family lineup with Nick.
My songs were suddenly being retrofitted with this Joseph K sound, this scratchy sound. I couldn't really get those sounds. I didn't even have an amplifier, I didn't have a drum kit. I would bang on boxes to make the sounds on the demo. But it was incredibly exciting.
In the end, all three of us, apart from Paul, who were in Joseph K, ended up doing some stuff with the Happy Family. But no, it wasn't like any attempt to kind of continue. I drummed, I played drums in front of thousands of people supporting The Cure with the Happy Family.
I was very good friends with a guy called David Band, whose brother Keith had a band called Jazzateers. And so we ended up going to the Hellfire Club, and that's where all Glasgow bands were at that point.
Alan Horne came and got in touch with us and said, you know, he'd like to manage us. And we were like, well, first of all, we didn't know who he was really. We'd kind of heard of him. And we said, well, what do you want to manage us for? We're not intended to do anything.
I mean, everybody you knew was in a band. That was what was happening. And some people were getting success.
We were just really, you know, happy that anyone took any sort of interest in us. And he seemed to like the music. Certainly liked a couple of tracks in the demo. And we said, well, you know, yeah, we'll if you want to manage us, that's fine.
We wanted to do a cover of Wasted. Edwin felt he could play the guitar on it, probably better than Ian. And he said he would produce it.
Pete Bellotti, who produced the original Donna Summer's Wasted song, wanted to produce it for us. So we all bundled into the transit van, went down to London. I always remember it because there was like Great Danes bounding along across the lawn to the gated community, and all of us kind of ramshackle falling out the back of a transit van. And it didn't really work because we were a bit shambolic. I think that was quite a lot to do with Postcard. It was all a wee bit shambolic.
I liked the song. Alison did a good vocal on it, and it sounded good. But whether it was ever going to come out as a single, I don't know. I think the label wasn't kind of. It was Orange Juice were going to Polydor, and all sorts of things were happening. So I think the label was either repositioning or just breaking completely apart.
I don't think we were the most popular Postcard band. I think all I can remember is from doing gigs. Like if we did a gig with Orange Juice and Aztec Camera, we were kind of pretty low down the popularity list. A lot of beer used to get thrown at you.
Alan was a big fan of one of our songs, especially called Everybody's Somebody's Fool, which he loved, because he liked really snappy pop. And he wanted that to be a single on Postcard. Which would have been great to have done, but the Postcards kind of sort of drifted away into the ether.
We were going to be on Postcard, but Postcard was never really a kind of like. Edwin was so much in charge of what he was doing that it was kind of like, you know, difficult to see how it could go further than what it was going to go, you know.
It was us and the Jazzateers that were going to be the next wave of Postcard bands, but there really wasn't any infrastructure there. And by this point, there was A&R people all over the place because Glasgow and Edinburgh were pretty hip, you know. So there was A&R people looking for the newest thing from this, you know, this music, this sort of country punk or soulful country punk or whatever it was, a mixture of everything. And we were sort of next in line.
I mean, we were on the front cover of Melody Maker. We'd only played about 4 gigs, and then it's like we did the whistle test. We were the first unsigned band in the whistle test. So it was just by being around that scene, the tension was already coming towards Juice anyway, you know. And so Aztec Camera were benefiting, and Joseph K were benefiting, and we benefited, you know.
London Records were one of the first to come in. A guy called Roger Ames, and he said, "Well, I don't think you're that great, but you've got a good sound, you've got good ideas, and I'd like to develop you over a 6-month period, but we'll give you a wage." So we just went with London Records, and that was it.
We were all together for a while, and then Alan discovered Paul Quinn, who was a fantastic singer, and so I was sacked, basically. Well, they say I wasn't sacked, I was let go, and then Paul Quinn came into the Jazzateers.
I didn't know Paul at all, but he was at university. He came down to study English, and I think it might have been through, I don't know, some contact at uni or something like that. And then I think he was a friend of Edwin's or something, but I didn't know him.
Paul was kind of on the scene, and he was known as being a really good singer, and he kind of epitomised Postcard, I would say, in lots of ways, the way that Edwin did. He looked good, he sang brilliantly, he fitted the whole image.
Well, Paul Quinn's one of these guys, bit of an enigma, but amazing. I mean, Paul Quinn's very good looking. We walked in the room, it's like amazing looking, a big, tall, slim guy with quite a deep voice and an amazing voice.
He was absolutely beautiful.
as a human, as a physically. But he was a really lovely man, person, and he was like this amazing voice that most people would kill for. So you couldn't get better.
Alan with Paul Quinn, it's like him looking for this sort of singer you could have who you could control, kind of. He tried it with Edwin, it didn't work. Roddy didn't work.
Well, I think he was always looking for people he could control. And he obviously couldn't control Orange Juice or Joseph Kay. And I don't think he could control Aztec Camera either. I think we were probably the most pliable group of people that he'd found.
What really changed it for us was meeting Elvis Costello. That's the thing that got us away mostly from Postcard, because he offered to record us straight away, and he was really great musician, man. I mean, for us who weren't really musicians, he took a lot of time with us. He would send you tapes all the time of different records, and he would sit with you, tell you how to stand next to the microphone or how to hold the guitar, all basic stuff, but he did it with great affection, and he took us on tour, and that was a brilliant laugh as well,
I love playing live, so live was great learning, and because Elvis Costello took us on tour, so you're playing really quite big gigs every night, Tiffany's in Glasgow or Hammersmith Odeon or whatever. When you get a big stage like that, it's great. Every night, it's fantastic. You get a couple of thousand people. So it's a great way of, because basically you're on stage, you're a show off. So you're just showing off. It's great fun. Great fun. With your 3 chords. How to make 3 chords interesting.
We did our Orange Juice tour. That was our first tour we did. It was 2 weeks. It was a mega mammoth tour for us. But it was like 2 weeks. But Edwin had been saying to people like John Peel, like various people, look out for Strawberry Switchblade. So the Orange Juice had been sort of spreading our name about a wee bit. And then John Peel actually phoned me up himself. Usually it's the producer that phones. And John Peel phoned, and I was like, do you want to do a session?
We got offered some sessions. That was how weird it was, just because you were from Glasgow. It's like John Peel's like, do you want a session? Kid Jensen, do you want a session? So we had 2 sessions it was almost like within 2 weeks. So we only had enough songs really to do the 2 sessions. Like we had to work quite hard to get 8 songs together so we could have 4 for each set, 4 songs per session.
The drummer and the bass player, because as we were a 4-piece in the beginning, they had like Jill was still at art school, and she had 1 year to go of her degree course, and I was a mother, but the child had a father and granny, so I could still do stuff. I wasn't really held down. Jill was more flexible, but one of them was a school teacher, and one of them worked some clerical job, and it came to the point where we have to make a choice, because we can only do one of the things because it's getting really demanding of us. So the bass player and the drummer decided not to leave their jobs, and Jill said that she would leave art school if she had to, but that she would continue doing it for as long as she could.
We met Bill Drummond and David Ball from Zoo, and they wanted to sign us in publishing, so that all happened really quickly. And then we released Trees and Flowers as a single, which was produced by Bill and David Balfe, and signed to WEA, and then released since yesterday.
It's hard to know why Postcard stopped. Alan Horne's the only person that can answer that. It's like so many labels of the time. There's a fantastic flash of inspiration, great ideas, but for a variety of reasons it just can't be sustained.
The beauty of Postcard Records is that it was there, it was really important, it was all over the place, it was really hip, it was really cool, and just disappeared. And a lot of these great things do disappear into the ether, they just shine brightly for a wee minute and then disappear.
Part of the thing about Postcard, it was a bit ramshackle, and once the next stage would be become very professional, to repeat what you've done, and inevitably in that kind of more charming peculiar, idiosyncratic setup, that all the things you loved about Postcard would probably have just disappeared. So in many respects, ending when it did maybe wasn't a bad thing.
Alan was a huge Orange Juice fan, and he really believed in Edwin, even though often he would kind of, lose faith in moments. But Alan really, it was all about Orange Juice. I mean, he brought in other groups. He never really liked Joseph Kay. He never really liked the Go-Betweens. I think he thought Rory was, fantastic, boy genius. But it was really about Orange Juice, I think, and Edwin.
Orange Juice and Aztec Camera were in the situation where they could write their own contract because every major label wanted to sign them. And so it was a very, very good contract, the Orange Juice contract with Polydor, and the Orange Juice owned all the recordings and they leased them to Polydor, and that's how the money was exchanged.
We brought in a producer, Adam Kidron, and he wanted to put in strings, he wanted to have keyboards, he wanted to have backing singers, and Stephen was against a lot of the stuff that Adam was trying to do. I mean, in retrospect, Stephen was absolutely right. I think he wanted us to make a record that was more in keeping with the Postcard records. But like I say, Edwin was always moving forward. He wanted to try different things. It was just that the producer we chose wasn't the producer to really. He wasn't very sympathetic with what we were trying to do. Edwin brought in Malcolm Ross as a fifth member of the band, and I kind of think, that was kind of a bit of a death knell for James.
We bumped into Edwin in the street, so I was saying to him, if Joseph Kay was splitting up, tonight's going to be the last gig we do, this is going to be the last one, it's the band splitting up. And Edwin immediately said, why don't you join Orange Juice? They'd recorded their album for Polydor by this time. And I was kind of like, what? It just seemed strange. He said, no, join, because I want to really concentrate on singing, so it'd be good if you could play lots of my guitar parts, because I find it hard playing guitar and singing at the same time. And also there's lots of keyboards on the album, so you could play the keyboards. And I said, well, what about the rest of them? Do you want to check? And he was like that, no, it's okay. I don't need to check with the rest of them, you can join.
Malcolm was brought in really as a keyboard to supplement on keyboards, because we'd added more keyboards and stuff on the album. But if you're playing guitar in a band with Malcolm Ross, who's in the band, that's kind of quite, I find that, a challenge. So I think that James started to feel a little bit intimidated and withdrew a little bit more, and kind of, so I think that was really the beginning of the end of the group when we became a five-piece.
There was a lot of personality clashes in Orange Juice all the time. It always had been, I think, because I helped them record their first single and their third single. They would ask me to go into the studio with them, and they would say, it's because but you've been in the studio more than us, which meant I'd been in the studio 2 days more than them, But I think it was because I could get on with them all. I was friends with all of them.
It was complicated because Stephen and I, like I said earlier, we never really got on that well in the group. He never really, he continued to, as far as Stephen was concerned, I was kind of like a blow-in who, was like a hippie art student.
I found I didn't really like it when I joined Orange Juice, because we were sort of rehearsing to go on tour, promote the album, and I realised my guitar style was just completely, it was just Joseph Kay, and then I was trying to play, and Orange Juice played in a more traditional way, and I really, at the time, didn't really play that way. It wasn't how I played. I just as one way of playing, which was Joseph Kay.
Edwin's ambitions for the group were to be more professional, to actually improve, and I don't really think he felt that James was even that interested in going in that direction.
David McClymont phoned me up one day and started saying, I think I'm just going to leave the band. I'm really angry. Stephen and Edwin have gone away down to London to sort something out, and I wanted to go, and Stephen said I couldn't, so it kind of come to head. And I just kind of said to him, well, yeah, it's not great, is it? I mean, I've been thinking of just saying to Edwin that I don't think it's working, and I'll rather be doing something else. And so I said, if you're leaving, yeah, may as well. I'm just going to leave as well then.
And then I can't remember if it was he or I who kind of thought, oh, well, it's a bit hard on Edwin, maybe just for us both to walk out. Let's just give him the choice. If he wants to keep the group going with us and without Stephen and James, he can do that. So we just said to Edwin, look, Edwin, don't really think it's working. The band's, it's just not good. We're going to leave, or if you want, we'll stay, but you'd have to kick Stephen and James out.
In retrospect, I think Edwin always felt that, and he said it, and I've read it in interviews, that he felt that I was the one who split up the group. But I know I wasn't the one who brought Malcolm into the band, and that to me was the beginning of that. And also I think Edwin felt he had betrayed, after the fact, I think he felt he betrayed Stephen and James, which I guess, him and I had.
The first thing we did with Rough Trade, did Pillar to Post, did it as a single. So we recorded that with Queen's Tattoos, the B-side. And we released that, and it got to number 39 in the charts. We got to make that first album, Highland Hard Rain, and it was a very pleasant, unrushed experience. The songs have been around for a while, so they're all there, they've been developed, so we're very happy with material. There was nothing, there was no pressure whatsoever. Then you have the success, type of success. Oblivious charted, and we're on top of the pops, and so on and so forth. And this goes on to the not exactly a household name, but we were Kent then. And then the major label has an interest, obviously, naturally, because they sniff a profit here. So Rob Dickens of Warner Brothers, who's the chairman of Warner Brothers, it's him that signed. We weren't signed by an A&R man, we were signed by the top guy.
Edwin and I and Malcolm basically were looking for a drummer. And like I said earlier, we were sort of looking for a rhythm section that would have that kind of hard-hitting, dancey, funky. So we're looking for someone that could play like, I think I remember as we were trialing drummers, we'd play them, something from Low and say, this is how we want the drummer to play, can you do this? And Zeke came along and he could, he was kind of fantastic.
Alan and Paul left. Keith and I, well, that's fine, because to be honest, by that time the relationship with Alan had completely broken down anyway. It was really, really difficult, so we were quite glad to see them both go.
Again, the next step was kind of taken out of our hands because Paul left the band at that point and was encouraged to be a solo singer, and we just kind of tread water for a while until Jeff Travis offered his money to make an album, because by that time he'd heard the discarded Postcard album, and he wanted an album like that, exactly like that, with a girl singer.
Went back up the road and we sat down and we said, we've got this money to do a Jazzateers LP. We don't have any singers because the Rutkowski sisters had gone. Alison, we couldn't ever ask Alison back because that had just got too difficult as well.
But we thought, well, we can't turn this down, so we should get a band together. So we got in touch with, originally, again, my brother had found somebody working in a bar who thought he'd be a good frontman, and that was Grahame.
They just got money from Rough Trade to make a record. They set out a budget for how much they were going to spend, and included in that enough money to get me to come in and do it, although I'd have done it for nothing. He was funny. He was like somebody who was going to be able to contribute, because Paul was never a songwriter. He'd do a couple of lyrics, but it was most of the time it was left to me to do, whereas Grahame, you could see that there was something about him. They did 2 records for Postcard that never got released, but obviously that was one of them. And then they got signed to Rough Trade, and Rough Trade wanted the same sort of thing, but they, being sort of twisted and I'm trying to think of a good word, obstreperous, I don't know. They decided, no, I'm going to give them the complete opposite of what they're expecting.
We were just fed up playing that music. We always liked loud music. We just chose not to play that at the time because we were partly being contrary, just
we didn't want to play what everyone else was playing. But then, by the time we came to record the album, a lot of people actually were doing that kind of music. And of course that means we don't want to listen to it.
The record was a complete departure. It was like, nothing I'd ever done, like playing lead guitar. It sounded like the Stooges and parts and stuff like that. It was music I'd never really kind of had any real interest in, but I really enjoyed doing it, and I really enjoyed like writing these kind of songs, and I really enjoyed working with Grahame.
That album was just a big two fingers to everybody. Like, it was a kind of punky statement.
The album they did release on Rough Trade was just the guitar playing is incredible on it, and again, another kind of hidden story. Ian Burgoyne's a great guitarist and songwriter, which scant few people would probably realise or recognise.
Rip It Up was written to be the B-side to I Can't Help Myself. Rip It Up wasn't written to be a hit single. Rip It Up was written as a kind of throwaway B-side, sort of jammed in the studio and recorded quickly. And then it was kind of, that's actually really good, let's put it on the album, we'll put something else on the B-side. And then it was like, let's make that the title track. And then it became the second single and became the hit.
We wanted to be a top 10 act, but we'd spent so long doing it, it was kind of like, there was an anticlimax, there was an element of anticlimax, and I kind of think that when we actually did Top of the Pops, we kind of felt that this wasn't really what we wanted. It kind of was a little bit empty.
All through Postcard Records, Edwin got nothing but good press. Every, like I said, Orange Juice were complete press darlings, flavour of the month. And when the Rip It Up album came out, I remember we were rehearsing to go on tour, and I remember going into the rehearsal rooms and Edwin was sitting on the floor and he had like Melody Maker, NME, sounds laid out open at the page of the reviews. I was kind of sitting there, like, woe is me, look what's happened, we've got bad reviews.
I think when the reviews came out of Rip It Up and they were really negative, Edwin was decided that we had kind of gone the wrong direction maybe, because they weren't good, the reviews of that record. But also, we had Zeke, and Zeke was trying to write songs, and Malcolm was writing songs, and, it kind of makes it doesn't water down what Orange Juice were, but it kind of diversifies it, and Orange Juice is always really Edwin, really.
Strawberry Switchblade took off, and then the Poems had to take a kind of bit of a backseat, because Strawberry Switchblade, when it did take off, it just was like whoosh, a rocket and off, and basically a lot of it was a blur because it happened so fast.
We didn't really know each other. It just to be sort of thrust into that kind of environment. We ended up having to move to London, which neither of us particularly wanted to do. But I hated travelling. I was agoraphobic, and I just more often than not I wouldn't get on the train to go down to London. Often Rose had gone down with Peter instead of me.
Warner Brothers did plug us quite a lot. They put a fair money into sort of pushing us. Which was insane, because the minute we sort of made it, they would just like put just as much energy into trying to change us. And I was just going like, this is what you signed, this is what you got.
You're a money-making machine. You have to make them money. We're spending this money on you, and you've got to make it back. That's the thing, that you're just a cog in their kind of machine. And it was just like, it's a difficult environment to be thrust into.
Being on an indie label is different from being on a major label, for lots of reasons. First of all, your circumstances have changed by then, and the expectations are different. The budgets are bigger, so you've got to sell more records. There's more pressure to have a hit. It's the same old story. Roddy only had like 6 months practically to write a new album, and I think the songs were strong enough, but the band hadn't developed them.
Roddy's idea, I think, for the second album was Martin Ofter would produce it, and it would kind of help him break America, and he would become, successful in America. Which no reason for him not to have kind of thought that might happen. It was on the cards then.
I wanted to get the original producer, the producer of the first album, to do it because I thought he was really good. And Ronnie said, no, we're going to get Martin Offler to produce the album. I think I choked him a cup of tea. Thought he was joking, you know. So I said, yeah, right, okay, no, we're getting Martin Offler. And the reasons being big name, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fair enough, yeah, why not? So you go with that, you know, and when the money starts getting flashed around, you think, oh, that's a great idea. Are the promises, you guys are going to be huge, we're going to break the States, and blah, 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 you'll be monstrous. You believe it. And so we had this songs that were underdeveloped from a band point of view. We had a producer who didn't quite get what it was all about, and we had a songwriter who was getting madder and madder by the day.
We had a meeting about which route we were going to take the album, and Trees and Flowers was all acoustic, and I think that sounded beautiful with the oboes and the French horns and everything else, and I was quite happy going down that route. But then we had a meeting with the record company, and they were going, oh, we've got this guy David Motion, and he's really it right now. You know, everybody wants to work with David Motion, and he's the nicest guy, or he was really, really nice guy. But, you know, we went in and done the album that way. And I think at the time I was thinking, it's not exactly right, but like 250 grand into the album, and we're going, well, you said we'd try it out, but I'm sure they're not going to go, all right, we'll just chuck that one in the bin and do another one. So we were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
They kept on trying, putting us in different producers, different studios. And then we went with Costello's engineer, who's Colin Fairley, a Scottish guy from Leven, Fife, and a guy called Bob Andrews, who'd been in The Rumour, Graham Parker on The Rumour. We did I'm Falling, first of all, which was a hit, got to number 11, and then Young at Heart followed that. And then I think we threw out Kath again. We got to number 39 or something like that. But yeah, so after that, we went on tour of the world, basically, you know, and it was brilliant. And but when we come back, a couple of years down the line, nobody knows who you are, you know, and the Smiths had arrived. So the Smiths really kicked in, and they were massive, you know, they were massive. So yeah, our sell-by date was kind of over by that time. We'd kind of lost contact with what any fan base was that we had.
The Bluebells kind of just faded out, really, you know. Like, there was no real kind of like fight or argument, or, I mean, we didn't even get dropped. It kind of rambled on. Ken David, I think, had enough at that point himself anyway, and there was no kind of like, we didn't know what they wanted, and we were fed up guessing, you know, like throwing darts. We used to write songs for ourselves, and then you end up writing songs for them. You know, they would say to you, "Listen to this record," and I don't know what it would be, and then you would, but they would be implying, do something like that, and then there's always a point. We never got to that point, but where you get hit with do a cover. So I was thinking that's going to be the next stage. I thought, let's get out now before we get to the, you know, do a Monkey song, you know, or do a Police song.
It was really hard for Edwin to sing a song that he hadn't written, if you know what I mean. It was, and in fact, when we tried to make the last album, which was the album we split up on, Texas Fever, we kind of tried as a group to record songs together, and spent an awful lot of money and time in the studio, and then Edwin kind of said, I can't really sing to these songs. I can't make up melodies. I just can't sing to them. So at that point we just went, oh, well, you know, let's salvage what we can out of, which became Texas Fever, and just call it a day.
Yeah, I was just touring constantly. We went to Japan, the start of that year, and then we did the States. Now during that, we did the States, I became extremely ill. I was diagnosed Crohn's disease, and I had to come off a tour. I won't say that I didn't drink as much or take any substances as much as certainly Rory did, but I wasn't, you know, innocent of that kind of stuff. So, and you don't eat properly, blah blah blah. So it hit me really, really badly, I'm down at I was feeling ill for quite a while. Didn't know what was wrong. I was actually diagnosed in Minneapolis. I was at a sound check in Minneapolis, and I was taken into hospital, and I was, of course, in the tour carried on. You know, they flew another bass player from London to take my place. And to be honest with you, I was never so relieved in my life.
I just thought that if you're going to make us go down the route you want us to and not the route that we don't, this is our art, this is us, you know, it's like you can't, like, that was the beginning of the end for me. It was like, okay, everything in life there's compromises as soon as anybody else is involved, but that was just too much. It's like, no, you're not going to turn us into something we're not, you know, this is what you signed, why? If you don't want to keep it that way, you know. And then it caused drifts between Jill and I as well, so that sort of the pressure was just too much.
And we just weren't ready for it, you know, so it kind of imploded. And we both kind of, you know, went separate ways. And in the end, you know, like if the second album had been released and there were songs written for it, it was basically going to be Rose and me. Like at one point, I think somebody, like our manager, said, well, why don't you know, Jill, you do one side of the record and Rose can do the other. And I went, what's the point of that? That's not a band, is it? That's just kind of two people not speaking and let's not do it, you know.
Grahame had his own band and we didn't really want to, you know, and he was really keen in his own band and his own sort of music. So he said, there's no way we're going to pull this guy away when he wants to do his own songs and stuff like that. And we got a call that Paul Quinn was wanting to come back to rejoin. And we said, well, you know, there's no way we can ask Grahame to stay. So if Paul is serious about coming back, then we may as well just try and see if we can get a major record label interested.
Must admit, at the time it felt as if everything might click back into place if we had Paul back. In retrospect, it was obviously a mistake. We should have continued with Grahame. But because we viewed this whole album as a project and that after it was finished we'd go our separate ways, we didn't really think that Grahame would be interested in continuing. So we just thought it was natural that we'll go back to working with Paul.
We got a major deal, which was which at the time we were, you know, this is amazing, we get money, you know, I think we get £50 a week and we're like, this is fantastic, we can actually go out and buy stuff. But when we started to make the records, you know, the records for me I just hate them.
They were young at the time, so they were very influenced by what Alan said, and Alan was like, he was a record label manager, you know, owned the record label, designed everything, he found Orange Juice, Aztec Camera, he was a really important guy, so they would listen to what he said, but after a while, as years go on, you stop listening to what people tell you and start wanting to do what you want.
The Bourgie album was that was just a complete and utter mess. I mean, that was like, I mean, the reason it's unreleased is because it shouldn't be released. I mean, it's just a complete travesty, the whole record.
Alan had set up Swamplands at that point. He'd convinced MCA that they had a record which was recorded before Paul had signed to MCA, which wasn't actually the case, which was the collaborate with Pale Blue Eyes. So MCA let them release that on basically London Records.
The story of Swamplands, really, you can trace it from the logo and postcard, which is a little pussycat banging a drum, I think it is. On Swamplands, it's become a big cat. And I think Alan inevitably realised that you had to grow up a bit and get muscle and do a deal with the devil, which in this case was London Records, if he was going to get some kind of success. Because success still is the name of the game, particularly for Alan. You know, you can't... It's all very well having some critically raved over independent singles, but, you know, people wanted to get in the top 10. And I think that was the next step for Alan. And Alan could charm people. And I think it was a guy called Roger Ames who was in charge of London. And Alan got his own label to play with.
London Records, which went through Phonogram, basically gave him a blank check. And, you know, when Postcard, you know, kind of disintegrated, because by that time, of course, Aztec Camera had gone to Rough Trade and then on to Warner Brothers, and Orange Juice had gone to Polydor. I think
the go-betweens are still in rough trade. I'm not quite sure what happened to Joseph K. You know, they wanted him to start his own label, so he had this kind of blank canvas, and for the first time in his life, he had a bag of money.
People were not content to be on rough trade anymore. They wanted to be on the biggest major, have the biggest budget, and compete in the real charts.
Swamplands was one of these things that promised a lot. You know, the logo was pretty good. You know, the vibe coming back from, you know, London, the city via Alan Horne was quite encouraging. And, you know, he was making some pretty inspired signings. You know, he signed Paul Quinn in the Independence Group. He signed James King and the Lone Wolves, the great kind of long-lost hero of the Scottish punk rock scene.
He signed acts that weren't necessarily always commercial. James King was phenomenal, fantastic, but probably no one in their right mind should have signed James King. But he was a bit crazy, but a fantastic, fantastic player. And it was great that Alan took some of these people onto what's effectively kind of almost a major label.
After he was setting up the Swamplands thing, he came up to Glasgow a few times. Swamplands, we were speaking about that since maybe February 1984. He'd come up a few times and he kind of had meals, and it was basically laid out the plan and who was going to be involved in Swamplands. And at the time it was Patty Paladin and Jane County and Johnny Thunders. That was the original thing, was kind of like his cast, and Paul Quinn was in there somewhere. And eventually Paul brought out the first record. But that was the premise he put. It was Johnny Thunders and it was Patty Paladin, and then you can come in, so make it kind of more kind of rock thing.
We got a 4-track tape recorder, I think, and like cassette, 4-track cassette, multi-track, and repaired to Russell's bedroom, which was about the size of this place. He had quite a lot of space, and we proceeded to write 4 songs and sent one copy to ZTT and the other to London Records.
A few days later, I love it. Come down to London, I want to sign you. I've got my own subsidiary of London Records called Swamplands. Do you want to sign for us? And it was like, oh, brilliant, yeah, we'll do that. So we signed with Alan Horne, who was a friend from the past, from Postcard days. And then we just started having tons and tons of fun, making crazy pop music.
Alan always wanted the fire engine as on Postcard. I suspect probably if you'd asked Alan, do you want the Joseph K. the fire engines, he'd probably said the fire engines.
There's a song called Ain't That Always the Way by Paul Quinn, and they were shooting a video for it in a very kind of ornate, old kind of Regency style hotel down in London near Buckingham Palace. So the kind of basis of the video was, you know, Paul Quinn being this kind of sort of lounge lizard crooner kind of thing with a sort of country style band that Edwyn Collins, I think from memory, was playing in. And the idea was going to be that Whistle Test were going to do a sort of film report on Swampland Records, focusing on this new single. And then at the 11th hour, in his true Alan Horne fashion, as only he can do, you know, he pulled the plug in the record.
If you look at Swampland's catalogue, there's gaps, and you find out this. I explained to someone what the gaps actually were. The gaps were actually, one of the gaps was the Johnny Thunders single and Patty Paladin. That's a gap, one of them. Another one is ours. It was a Flyaway. That was another one. That's another gap which wasn't released.
Once Alan had the ability to kind of say, oh, I'm not sure if that's good enough to release, that's the other thing that was really bad for him. Having just that financial stability so that you could say, nah, we're not going to put that out, we'll try and record that again.
I remember, I think he had a dentist chair in the office, like one of these ones you could pump up and down. And I remember once, I don't know who's in the chair, it was maybe something like Edwyn or something like that, but Alan he was quoted as saying, you know, we can pump you up like that and we can let you down the minute we want to.
We found our calls, you know the one, he's in a conference, you know, we kept getting that one. In a conference, and actually, we found out, the guys, I wasn't there, but the guys found out some like a party, by you're getting dropped. How do you know? So Alan didn't have the manners or decency actually tell us that basically getting dropped from the label, you know.
It was a shame because, you know, particularly in the case of James King and the Lone Wolves, you know, that was a band who in 2014, some 35 years later or something, have just got around to releasing their debut album when in fact they could have done it on Swamplands Records. So it was a kind of a great opportunity, but essentially a squandered opportunity.
London Records just sort of didn't get back to us one day, which was an indication, a prearranged indication that that period was over. They'd chucked us.
You know, that was the kind of almost like the beginning of the end, because although I think Quinn put a few singles out, James King never ever released anything from the studio, and I can't genuinely remember, you know, what came from Swamplands after that, because it just sort of seemed to really soar like a rocket and fireworks night, and then burn out, and then plummet to earth.
Alan just disappeared. I don't know what had happened. He just kind of evaporated, as he does.
The story of Swamplands is Alan. It wasn't about us, it wasn't about Wynne, it wasn't about Paul Quinn or anyone else. As far as the papers, the weeklies were concerned, the story was Alan Horne.
He had the basis for something great, and then just when the goal was open and all he had to do was shoot to score, he kind of hit it past the post.
Alan always decried on Postcard Records how we didn't have the money or the infrastructure to have hit records, and then he had that with Swamplands and he still didn't have any hit records.
Alan Horne is a great ideas man. He thinks up fabulous ideas and really is, he walks into his kind of like record company's offices, and he walks into his kind of like well, it's not really so much the kind of music weeklies anymore, but he'd have him round his little finger. He'd come out with an idea and they'd swallow it. But then, I've got them, you've got them all, and how are you going to follow this through? And that's when he seemed to lose it.
If you kind of look at the various components of Alan Horne and Postcard and London Records and Universal and the London music scene, I don't think it was ever going to work. It was a kind of recipe for disaster. It was one of these great ideas that when it came to fruition didn't really happen.
It's curious why Alan did start Postcard all over again a few years later. I think that he'd had some great music with Paul Quinn. He did some really good things. But I wonder how much Alan was actually convinced. Yet one of his slogans was, "In the meantime, before failure," which is quite a catchy slogan, but it's not one that screams, "I'm going to be successful." It may be one of those classic cases of unfinished business.
It was like he was there again. What's the opposite of evaporate? Whatever that was, whatever that is, he just appeared again in Glasgow with Paul, and they had a big flat up in behind Hill Head Station, just up, you know, by the Union. It was like Postcard, it was Record Central.
They basically had both moved back up to Glasgow. I think they wanted to try and relaunch Paul's career again. It seemed like obviously the best way to do it was to restart a label that had that so many people had so much affection for.
Postcard kind of came out of the ashes again and had another period of activity, which I actually think again is undervalued, because there were some great records coming through that second version of Postcard.
I was watching the TV and there was a documentary on about Japanese love hotels, and one of the franchises was called the Nectarine No. 9, and I thought that's a good name for a band that I want to be in. I'd given Alan a tape of the 4-track stuff I'd been making up, and he phoned me the next day and said, "We love it, we absolutely love it, Davey. Let's make a record." And so we made a C with 3 stars.
Again, that was David Henderson from the Fire Engines, so again it was you know, the same old usual suspects that had all been around from the late 70s, early 80s. So I think Alan would have probably loved to have done a Fire Engines record the first time round. So second time round he got to do the Nectarine No. 9.
Paul was living with him at the time, Paul Quinn. So we just got talking about doing a record for that. So I agreed to do that with him. And then Paul's great. He's such a great guy. And then James was involved in it, which is always a fantastic bonus too. James Kirk and Campbell Owens was involved in it.
My favourite work by Paul's definitely the two albums he released with the independent group when Postcard re-emerged in the 90s. Both of those albums are fantastic, and I think a lot of credit to that has to go to Alan Horne, who definitely had the vision of how to try and make both of those records, and the people in the band, you know, Mick Slavin, Campbell Owens, James Kirk. It was just a great collaborative project, and it was a perfect setting for Paul to sing against, I think.
First met Edwin because Jeff Travis wanted me to do an album, End of the Surrey People, and he suggested Edwin as a producer. So I went round Edwin's house one day, dropped off some cassettes of the songs I'd been working on, and that took it from there. And then he sort of selected an album's worth of songs and we started recording them. Edwin said, well, why don't we finish it off on my 8-track, which he had in his bedroom? So that's how we finished it off. And then we had an album. We didn't have a label, so Edwin was trying to get all different labels. And right at the start, he said to me, look, I'll try loads of labels, but he said, I really don't want to do this, but if the worst comes to the worst and no other label wants to touch it, it'll have to come out on Postcard. And that's what happened.
The Postcard thing was really quite a breath of fresh air. It was kind of against all that, it was kind of anti-macho. So the Glasgow had this scene as being a big sort of tough, you know, razor gang town, or, you know, a town full of thugs and hard men. And it became cool all of a sudden to be quite camp.
There's lots of successful acts, and it's just quite accepted that, you know, an act can emerge from Fife, from Glasgow, from Edinburgh, and be signed if that's what you want to do. But you've got to remember that in the late 70s that wasn't a given at all. There was a feeling very much of being out in the cold and that no London record company would come and sign you. But I think Postcard did change that, and because it was witty, clever, interesting, the music was good, and it was not what was expected to come out of Scotland.
You know, they showed that it could be done, because, you know, way back in the early 80s when those two labels, one in Glasgow and one in Edinburgh, started up, you know, how do you make a record? Who presses it? How do you get the sleeve? You know, then when you've got the sleeve and you've got the record in the sleeve, what do you do with it? You know, because it wasn't as if, you know, all the record, the radio stations and the TV stations up here were falling over themselves to give you coverage and exposure. They weren't.
I think everybody was still feeling their way forward. It was still quite new in terms of what an indie label could be, what it could do, how it could really give you a wider audience. I think it was very early days. I mean, there was only 2 or 3 years that the idea of the independent label had happened. So, you know, Postcard was quite a pioneer in that sense of the true spirit of what an independent label is.
What we now know as indie music was invented in Scotland. If you think about Postcard, particularly, but also Fast Product, and many of the bands at that time, Aztec Camera or whatever, they, you know, that's the seeds of labels like Creation, a certain kind of jangly 60s inspired literate lyrics kind of approach to music. That's really been the template for indie music to this day.
To look back, you do realise that it was a great period. It was a degree of altruism about people trying to make music that mattered, not just for selling. Yes, everybody wanted to sell records, but that wasn't just the end product.
I do like Alan's mystery and the fact that I don't even know him, but, you know, in some small way connected him. Because he created something that's lasted 30 years which is a long time in pop music.
The influence of Postcard could be seen in countless Glasgow bands that took it and made it very commercially successful and made a lot of money off it. But that's often the way. The pioneers are never quite rewarded financially.